So for this video, I know it seems like a rant, but I wanted to take some time and talk about my issues with Battlefield 6. Now for context, I've been playing Battlefield since 1942, as in the game, not the year, and I have about 250 hours in Battlefield 6. So I wanted to say that I'm a Battlefield vet. I know how cringy that can sound by saying, well, I'm a Battlefield vet, but I don't know. I think it's appropriate when you've been playing for over 20 years. That I don't know. I think it makes sense. Now, with that out of the way, I'd like to go over 8 points, which I'll pin in the comment section below. The timestamps. If anyone's interested, they can go ahead and look at it and skip to the parts they're just interested in. MR Missile Exploit. This one's fairly safe to point out, as I'm sure a lot of people hate this exploit. It's tied to any lock-on weapon for vehicles in Battlefield 6. It prevents information about the lock-on or the missile inbound itself or for the lock-on itself, resulting in getting shot down with no warning. They often get one shot. It does ruin the idea of flying anything in this game. So for that, I think it needs to be patched out as soon as possible. Nothing's worse than struggling to get an aircraft for what you want, only to be shot down by things you can't see or you can't react to. V-tapping. This one is understandably a bit of a hot take. On the surface, it doesn't seem like an exploit or even something that needs to be patched out. Hopefully, once you hear my reasons, you'll come to understand why I think it's an issue. Firstly, what the hell is V-tapping? Well, V-tapping is when you're using the vertical thrust or the thrust vectoring to force the jet to turn faster by spamming and canceling the input to using it, increasing your turn angle by a factor of 15 degrees. This is an issue because the attack jet doesn't have access to this, so it makes the other jet stand no chance in a dogfight. And if the other fighter isn't aware of this exploit, then it leaves him with no chance to fight back against it. But again, why is this a problem, you might ask? I'm sure that this is hard to use, and it's not exactly a get-out-of-jail-free card, right? Well, that's where you'd be wrong. If one side is allowed to have jets and the other side isn't, the jets will hunt down everything else in the game. From bombing troops, nuking tanks and helis, it will lock the other teams out. In an effort to prevent this, I'm calling to remove V-tapping altogether. I know it's a bit, harsh to say, hey, I want to take away this thing that only the pro players can use. But, I mean, if the pro players are the only ones that know about this, and it really isn't that hard. You can hold shift and tap S rhythmically, and you're guaranteed to outturn anybody that you're fighting and guaranteed to get on their 6 every single time. So for that reason, I'm thinking that it's just too strong, it's too easy, it's definitely an exploit, and it's an exploit because if you hold it for anything longer than a quarter of a second, you lose all your mobility and you actually don't get any more turn out of it. You start drifting forward and you're just turning the nose to a different angle. So why would it work that way in 90% of cases, but if you cancel the input and you spam the input, then it allows you to turn faster? I think that's evidence enough to say that it's not working as intended when you're doing that, and you're 100% using an exploit. So I think for that reason, it 100% should be removed from the game. Role limits. Back in 1942, Battlefield 3 and 4, they had a limit to how many people per team could pick a class. Back then it was 1 per squad, but instead, I would rather it set to 8 per team rather than 1 per squad, as this would allow for the same effect, but it wouldn't limit a squad, it would just limit the team itself. Now why? Why would I want roles to be limited? Why suggest it in the first place? Well, as it stands right now, there's a meta. Depending on the game mode and map you're on, you will see a huge population boost in one class type over others. Such as Breakthrough is mostly just supports, and Rush is just mostly engineers. Conquest is mostly recons. But the maps also change this, such as Liberation Peak tends to be a mixture of recons and engineers, while as maps such as Rock Valley and Operation Firestorm tends to be mostly recons. I think that the reason I want this to be changed is to prevent one side from having, or one player rather, from having access to everything they need to handle any threat they come across at any given time. I don't think it really makes sense for a team-based game to allow one player to be able to handle jets, helis, tanks, snipers, players across the board. I think it should be forcing players to have to utilize their team in order to take those things out. So by capping it to 8, this would force players that if they want to mass play engineer to deal with the aircraft, they can have 8 out and that's it. So if they want to deal with those aircraft, they have to work together with that engineer. So maybe you pick support and you give that engineer some ammunition so that he can keep doing his job. Maybe you play recon and you are laser designating all the aircraft so that the engineers know where they're going to be coming from. Maybe you're playing assault and you're just distracting tanks and shooting at the tanks so that the tanks are not looking at the engineers, so the engineers can get some hits in. It should be more team focused, and I think that's completely fair. Changes for challenges. I don't really think I need to explain my thinking on this one, but I personally feel that challenges should reflect your intended role, as in, for an example, for Assault. Assault has a challenge where you have to get a bunch of kills on enemies that are concussed. I think this is counterintuitive to what the role of an assault should be, because the most efficient way to get kills on stunned enemies is to use your stun grenades defensively. Wait for them to push up to you, stun them, then turn around the corner and get the kill. Since playing defensively works against what the assault is trying to do, I find that challenge is forcing the player to play in a way that acts against their role. So I think the challenges should be changed entirely to things like contesting an objective or capping objectives, as this would reinforce the notion that you as an assault need to be pushing and you need to be capping objectives. You need to be playing for the objective. You need to be trying to break through their lines and get some kills. As not only is that as how they advertise the role to begin with, but that's how the role has been since Battlefield 1942, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable request to make. Ammo for the repair tool. This one's a really big hot take. I'm fairly certain on that one. But the reason that I'm suggesting it is because I think it's way too strong for one engineer player to just sit on another tank and just infinitely repair that same tank over and over and over again. This just results in that tank being unkillable from one single source. So if say for an example, a IFV strolls up and is attacking a main battle tank, well, that IFV has nothing to fear against that battle tank so long as they got one engineer just spamming repairs on this thing. The IFV can just point its front towards the battle tank and sit in place and just spam its ordnance at that battle tank, and the battle tank will never deal enough damage fast enough to kill that IFV, when the whole point of the battle tank is to be countering out other teams' armor and vehicles. So I think for that reason, they should have ammo. I think it is a good tactic that you should be allowed to repair your team's tanks, and who's to say when you're allowed to do that. I think that's perfectly fine that you can do it in the middle of a fight. But what I am saying is you shouldn't be able to do it infinitely. I think that if a tank hits it, say, 4 or 5 fucking times with an armor-piercing shell and deletes like 60% of its HP every shot, I think at some point the engineer should run out of charges for his repair tool, and now cannot repair that tank anymore, and now the IFE will now have to start thinking about whether or not he wants to be in this engagement or try to run away. And I think that's a reasonable ask, as all I'm asking is to give back utility back to the retrospective roles of the tanks, right? I want the main battle tank to fulfill the advertised role of hunting other tanks, and I want the IFV to fulfill its role of hunting infantry. I want the transport helicopter to fulfill its role of flying around and dropping off soldiers without just getting one tapped out of the sky in 2 fucking seconds. I want the attack jet to fulfill its role of being really good at destroying ground vehicles. And I want the fighter jet to be really good at dealing with other jets in the sky. That said, I do believe that everything in the game should be able to at least put up a fight against anything in the game, but I don't believe that everything in the game should be able to counter everything in the game. That's kind of the difference here. I know people want to argue the point, well, if you want the fighter jets to be good at fighting other jets, well, then why do you want the V-tapping removed? Well, the reason I want V-tapping removed was because it's not just making it so that it can fight other jets, it's making it so that it doesn't have to fear jets, period. And I think that's way too wrong. Like, way too strong. Can't have that. You cannot make a jet have a safe button, a safe mode, that it doesn't have to fear another jet at all. I think that if a better pilot is in an attack jet than the person in the fighter jet, regardless if the fighter jet can use V-tapping, I think that the attack jet should be able to win that fight if he's better at flying his jet than the other person is. I think that's completely reasonable to ask. But as it stands right now, it's not the case, because anybody can just mash Shift S, and they're now right on that attack jet's ass. And I think that's just too strong. It's too easy to use. It's too effective at winning dogfights. It needs to be tweaked. Aircraft controls. The aircraft in this game has input delays, which makes the aircraft feel very sticky and very sloppy. The aircraft in this game should get a patch that makes it more responsive than it is now, allowing for jets and helis to move more freely than what it is now. As it stands, it feels like you're flying on rails, you're not really in control of your own aircraft, which should never be the case if you're piloting anything in the game. But again, that's just my opinion. Bloom needs to be lowered by a lot. I don't think that one I need to go into detail as to why. It's just not a good system to punish players for doing well with a gun, forcing them to miss. All that's going to do is force a meta, which I think the devs want to avoid anyways. M4. Sorry. Lastly, tweaking the assault's gear. I don't know if it's just me, maybe this last one is a bad take, but I feel like the assault gear doesn't have much of a use outside of the launcher and the ladder. I think across the board, including the adrenaline shot, needs to be worked on to give more utility to the assault class. Very short, very sweet. I think just they need to change how some of these items work. If you need some examples, sure, there's the breach flash launcher, which actually doesn't breach surfaces and doesn't actually flash anybody when you're trying to breach from a surface, that is. The only utility I've seen is to direct impact a player and have that player run into his friends and then flash his friends. And that's just such a niche for the weapon that, to me, it's just not worth taking this gadget for. So I think it needs to be tweaked to have more of a function towards it. I think that how it should work is that it should run a system check to see, oh, did it hit a surface? Yes. Okay, regardless how thick the surface is, on the opposite side of that said surface, it should immediately detonate a flash at the first pixel point of the beginning of that surface on the other side of that wall. So, give you an example. Say I have a wall that is 4 meters long or 4 meters thick. I fire one of these breaching rounds. 4 meters on the opposite side of that wall should detonate that flash. At the very point of where that wall ends should detonate that flash. And this would be infinitely more useful, because now you could use this as an actual flashbang that ignores cover. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. I'm sure that will get a little bit buggy with things like tanks and helicopters and whatnot, but I think, if anything, wouldn't that just be more like Battlefield at that point, using gadgets that are unintended and in creative ways to accomplish interesting feats? So what if someone shoots one of these things at a transport helicopter and blinds the transport helicopter pilot? I think that just makes sense. I think that's completely fair. I don't know, maybe that one's just me, but right? And that's just one of the gadgets. Like, they're all like that except for the HE grenade launcher and the ladder attachment. Those are the only ones that actually have some fucking utility, but everything else, it just feels super niche and super limited as to when you can use it and how much benefit you're going to get from them. So I think they should get tweaked so that they're more useful. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, or taking the time to watch this video and hearing me out. I don't hate this game, even if you might have gotten that impression from watching this video. I just want to see the game play and feel as it once did back in 2012 with Battlefield 4. It was one of my all-time favorite games, and I really just want to see the devs put the same kind of love into the game as they did with that game. Anyways, I hope you have an amazing day, and peace.